Hey, everybody, welcome back to the Let's Talk Vibes podcast, where we speak soul contracts, illuminating the path to higher understanding. This is another deep dive episode where we're going to be talking about the 14.5 with my dear friend Heidi. Say hi, Heidi.
Hi.
Well, I'm your host, Lauren.
And I'm Yiannah.
Welcome to the episode.
Yes. The 14.5 is very interesting because right off the bat, like the main thing people talk about, right? It's this intense energy. It also has that air. It's the intense Scorpio energy, but it also has that Aries assertive five and that intuition. And some people kind of shy away from that 14.5, and some people are like, no, I understand its power. I want to get into it. I want to feel it. I want to get to the full expression of it. So today we're just kind of going to go over the highs, the lows, the karmic challenges, the talents, all of that. But you, Heidi, have 14.5s in your name.
Yeah, so in my birth name, I have it, and in my married name, I have it, both versions of the common name. Um, and one of the things about the 14.5s that's quite interesting is you've got the 14, which, as you said, is very much that intensity, but also that intuitiveness, but can be quite ungrounded. And then it's kind of double whammied by the 5, which is very light and etheric and intuitive and very spiritual. So if you've got lots of 5s, which I have in other parts of my chart where I've got the 14.5, it kind of really makes me quite maybe quite in my head. And I was in a corporate job as well when I had that um those numbers. And so that was quite challenging because you've got the entrepreneurial side of it and the pioneering and the innovative and the want to break the status quo. But as a human being, that's lovely as a spirit, but as a human being living that life in a corporate uh,
Yes.
hierarchy was quite challenging on the body. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And it's interesting as you mentioned that it makes me think about the fact that there are some of our combination numbers, which we've talked about when you have the double digit followed by a single digit. Those are our combination numbers. Some of them, those two numbers are quite different. I think about the 12.3, for example. The 12 is the forever student, the 3 is the teacher. Like these numbers are really different, but you do blend them together. Whereas there are others like the 15.6 and the 14.5, where each of those numbers on their own already have a lot of overlap. So when you do bring them together, it is kind of, as you put it, the double whammy, especially with the 14.5, since it's about, the 14 brings this intensity. Yiannah, it's interesting to me that you did bring up the astrology for both of these numbers at the beginning. Again, that 14 is going to be Scorpio, 5 is going to be Aries. Well, if you're familiar with astrology, those are both Mars ruled signs. So you kind of have that Mars energy, a little bit of that fighter, a little bit of that force. And it definitely helps to understand, I think, both of those numbers and why we say this is a double whammy number because it's double whammy of Mars ruled energy too.
Oh, yeah. Okay, so let's get into the intensity, almost karmic or challenging aspect of this 14, right? It is like this reflector. You are a reflector. Every relationship you're in, it's like you are just constantly showing to them, oh, this is who you are, the parts of them they don't want to see, and vice versa. So let's get into that because I think that is such an important, huge element of the 14. And very easily you can get stuck into that challenge of that, but breaking out of that and being able to reflect within yourself and how that changes your life, I think is the beauty of the 14.
And it's great because the 14, once you work through your karmic issues and you've grounded and you've kind of worked out who you are, because the path of the 14 is who am I? Who am I? What am I? Who am I? And so you kind of keep going through that reiteration that gets reflected back to you through your relationships, which can be very, very intense, really, really intense
Yeah.
relationships. But like I say, the beauty of it, and with the 5 side as well, you've got the teaching and the mentoring and the highly sensitive, the empathic. So I always think of the picture of the 5 of the 14-5 looked to me like an ear, which you're there, you're kind of able to hear and listen, and then be there to hold the space for people once you've worked through kind of like the more challenging aspects of it. So like you said, that beauty's there, that to give you that teacher, that spiritual. And also what I found is that the writing, when I've spoken to people with 14-5s in their chart, the writers, and I've got one lady who's lovely, and she literally bicycled across Europe, and she wrote this lovely, very lightweight, humorous paperback, and it was her first book. And so we're looking through, and it's like her experience was reflected back to others through her writing, and then they were able to kind of look at some of the life lessons from that as well. So it's that kind of interesting interplay between seeing yourself and others being reflected back at them. And like you're saying, Yiannah, sometimes we don't want to see what gets reflected back at us as well.
Oh yeah.
And well, no, it's just so interesting, that story, right? Because we talk about 14-5, that especially when it's in Soul Destiny, you kind of go through journey of life, discovering who you are, and you write a book about it. But this is someone who literally went on a journey, like this very physical, specific journey. Like that's incredible. It even makes me think
Yeah.
about someone who were to like walk the Camino de Santiago,
Yeah.
for example. That same, like, you went on this very physical journey. And I wonder, like, did she have that within her physical triangle? Like, I wonder if that's how it manifests more, if you have it in your physical triangle.
I can't remember if it was in her physical or her spiritual, but speech, particularly written speech for her. I mean,
Mhm.
obviously with the 14-5, beautiful automatic writing. If you're on the
Yeah.
spiritual, doing spiritual things, automatic writing is really comes quite easily, that channel for 14-5. And I can't remember if it was in her earlier chart or the latter part, but the actual adventure she had was after she was 40. So she early 40s, maybe middle 40s, and but it was kind of a progression, because she'd always been a teacher. She'd brought people around her, but always teaching in non-structured, or very much that kind of entrepreneurial energy, that pioneering energy. And
Yes.
she's very, very grounded. She's always out in nature, which really helps to balance with the 14-5 as well. So she really managed to kind of get it really, really nice and right, so to speak.
Okay,
Yeah.
so in our work, we have, and we talk about this all the time, how you tend to attract clients who have similar numbers to you. And like, what a beauty in that, because you get to approach these energies from such a personal, different point of view. So have you found that you also attract a good amount of people who have that 14-5 in their soul contracts?
Yeah, but also I've got quite a lot of numbers, because I've got my birth name and my married name and my optimized name and common versions of my married name and my birth name. And there's actually only 2 numbers in the soul contract reading system I don't have. So
Oh,
yeah,
so you get a
so
variety then.
yeah,
Yeah.
but that's very much like the 12-3, because 12-3 is right in my birth chart, and it's also in my married name as well. So we talked about the 12-3, and the 12-3 is about expansion. So I just want to do it all. I want to try lots of different things and do it all. So
Yeah.
it's not surprising then that I've got different numbers. But yeah, you do. And I think when you're kind of on your own journey with this system, you kind of get the people with the numbers who you can kind of cope with at that time, or where your learning is at that time. And it does mean you kind of have that empathy as well. So you kind of, if someone's got and depend, as you've covered earlier, depending where the numbers are in your chart, it gives it a completely different flavor. So someone might have a 14-5 in Soul Destiny like me, or they might have it in a talent. So their experience of
Right.
it, compared with the different flavor of the rest of their chart and the other numbers in their chart, is going to give them a different life experience. experience, but you do have that empathy of, oh my gosh, yeah, when things were challenging, they were, and you can really reflect on, particularly when you mentioned right at the beginning, Yiannah, about that intensity of a relationships, not just for the person who's the 14-5, but for those people around them, how intense they find that. And I'm triple Sagittarius, so I'm very intense in my very earlier days as well. So it's quite interesting. And yet I've got someone who I know quite well who's got 14-5, and their life, I've not really seen that intensity in their relationships. They kind of just seem to kind of go through life quite nicely, but then that's the makeup of the rest of the chart and their life experiences and where they are on their soul journey, maybe.
Right. Okay,
Yes,
let's get
absolutely.
into the intensity of, so in your work maybe, and I guess this goes for all of us, like, and it's funny, I don't have too many people who have 14-5s. Mostly the ones that I have gotten have it in their soul destiny. So right away, I'm like, okay, got it. You're here to write. Got it. Like, you are here to reflect in your life. You are here to write about it and help teach others. But in your experience, and this goes for everybody, when you do have people who have it in a karmic element, what does that range of that intensity look like in their life?
Yeah, so uh, often it can be quite interesting. Uh, uh, Blended families, is that the correct word we'd use nowadays?
Yes.
Yeah.
So you might find that they've had a situation with adoption, or step parents, or half sisters, step sisters, brothers. Kind of, you look at kind of the different types of relationships they've had. Not saying that necessarily they're bad, but there has been quite a lot of intensity, and intensity can be highs as well as lows. So you can have that very, very, very intense love in your spousal, or with your partner. Um, but also, when you're looking in the work environment, what gets reflected back to me when I'm talking to people who've got the 14-5, often there may have been some struggle, some friction with people in authority, and it's that kind of, was there some bullying in their earlier life, or even in work, and it's that person trying to find, through those very intense relationships, who are they, who am I? Am I this person? Am I that person? So as well as them being the person that people can see themselves be reflected back, they, like you said earlier, they see, oh gosh, actually I need to take some responsibility for that. So if I keep getting this pattern of winding people up and then behaving in a certain way, perhaps it might be me, because 14-5 can be a bit pushy, a bit rigid as well. And interestingly, sometimes it comes into the rigidity of the body, back issues as well, which is quite interesting when you start to look at the kind of the physical side of some of the aspects of the numbers. When you talk to people, and do you have a very rigid body, or did you used to, and what do you do now? Do you do a lot of yoga, dance, walking, tai chi, gardening? What do you do to help with that rigidity, which I always think is quite stunning when you actually look at the numbers and then the aspects they're related? You talked about the star signs, and our astrology, but when you start to look at the numbers and which aspects, so it's very discerning, the 14. So
Yes.
often, are there issues around smell or in the intestine? Because
Yeah.
that's where we process, we discern through our physical body. So it's really interesting when you look at the aspects of the physical body with the numbers as well. It's quite surprising.
It's interesting because, like, I don't usually think about human design too much in this system in terms of how they relate to each other. But obviously, we're talking about the 14, how it's a mirror, how it's a reflector. Well, that's obviously a term, and a type within human design is the reflector. And sure enough, earlier on, I was doing some readings for people, and there were two people, and they had a soul destiny 14-5, and I asked them, and they both were reflectors in human design. And I was just like, the way that I see when you sort of find this parallel information between modalities, it's like something spirit didn't want you to miss, regardless of which path you might have followed and what might have been interesting to you, you were going to get that information because it was really important. So I always look for where you have these similar themes between the modalities. It's like that was really important and spirit didn't want you to miss that.
Oh yeah. And it's interesting too because generally the fives are this optimistic, their glass is half full, they're like these motivators. But then in conjunction with the 14-5, especially if you're still stuck in that karmic challenging aspect, it's like, well, the fives are so etheric, which means they tap into the collective energy, they consume other people's stuff, so they'll experience that negativity, that depression. So it's almost as if the 14 is not intense enough when you're still stuck in that challenging aspect. Now that 5 is just going to be like, I'm just going to press on that intensity, and you're going to feel that ungroundedness. You're going to feel all these energies. And a lot of times, like, we don't even realize that we're processing other people's stuff, which is perfect for that 14-5 because of that reflection, that mirror aspect. You are processing other people's stuff and you're processing it as your own unknowingly, and it can be so intense. And some people, I think, just have a tough time coming out of it. And that's why I think it's one of those numbers where people are like, oh, I'm going to name my child or I'm going to change my name. I may want to not have that number frequency show up in the chart. But again, it's all about, do you have enough strength and talents in the right positions to get out of it? Because we're not meant to stay in the karmic aspects. We're not meant to stay in the challenge of life. We are meant to overcome and grow and come all to all the beauty of each of these frequencies, because they all are so beauty. But it can be, very intense.
Right. Well, I think Yiannah, you just made a really good point there because it's not so much that they're processing other people's things. I mean, they are, but what's sort of happening first is that they're taking on other people's things because the 5 is so sensitive. The 14, they take this in, and because right, they're a mirror, they really kind of absorb that from other people. And so what the lesson is for them is to discern what is theirs and what is not, to discern, oh, this is mine to process, or this is mine to kind of hold up a boundary and not take this in. This is not mine to take in and to process. So that's part of the lesson for them. So you're right that they do it, but also in the sense of to not stay stuck in that aspect, in that karmic aspect, it's to learn not to, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
And, I'm realizing as well, I don't think we've really gone into why these relationships are intense and specifically named why they're intense. So the intensity comes from the fact that the 14-5, the 14 is a mirror, as we've said. So what happens is that other people look at the mirror and they see reflected back to them the parts of themselves they are trying to keep hidden. And it is that the fact that what is they're trying to hide is sort of out for display, so perfectly reflected back, that is what creates the intensity. And I bring this up because I think for myself, who has 7-7 in my physical karma, or anybody who has numbers that makes them want to hide, if you're trying really hard to hide this, like as a 7-7, it's almost like I, if I were to feel that someone saw what I was trying to keep hidden, it would make me feel like I was a failure at hiding. So not only is it intense that you see this thing you're trying to hide back, but now I feel like I failed to not be good enough at hiding it from you. So again, that's where this intensity is coming from.
And you both picked up some really good points there. And for me, it's about, why do we do this work? Why do we want to help people to understand their charts? Because if you've got someone with the 14-5, say, and it's in their birth chart, and you go through the reading, it's the first time they've had a reading, and you start asking them some questions about their experience in earlier life and some of the things that are going on, and they're like, oh gosh, and this is always happening. And then the end, you can help them to work through that, but then you can give some really tangible, practical, really simple things. So you were talking, Yiannah, about the taking on other people's stuff. As a 14-5, we take
Yeah.
on other people's stuff. We're highly sensitive. So practical thing about clearing your physical energy, smudging or whatever you do to do that, going barefoot, ground barefoot out in the garden, engaging with nature. And one of the beauties I love about the system that we all use is that, it's not just saying, oh, and this is what the chart says, and these are the lessons and experiences your soul wanted you to have when you're down here. But actually, if you are having some challenges still with aspects of that, here are some practical, easy to do recommendations. It might be starting to do yoga for that rigidity, as we talked about, or I mentioned the lady that wrote the book. She was really very grounded, as in she was in nature a lot naturally, because that was part of who she was. But for me, I was always very up here in my head, slightly academic. And in my earlier life, I was out in the countryside with horses. That was great. But when I was at university and then in my first jobs, I was in cities. And so I didn't have access to the nature to help to ground me. And I didn't understand that at the time. And so then, therefore you have other things that you use to cope with that being very etheric, food or alcohol or what have you. So I think one of the beauties is not just, saying to people, this is your chart and saying what the numbers mean, but what does it mean for them, and how can we give them really simple recommendations to help them to kind of work through, like you say, those challenges if they haven't yet got to the gold, because in our challenges is the gold of who we're here to be as well.
So let's get into some of those talents. Like, what does it look like when you have started to work through the challenges? What is the beauty and the gift and the talent of the 14-5?
We talked earlier about making super mentors,
Yeah.
great mentors, because they can reflect back. They've got, as I say, for me, the symbol of the 5 is like an ear. And they've got that amazing connect, very psychic, very empathic, very intuitive, amazing connection channel to source, God, whatever you want to use, and speech and communication and writing abilities. So there are some lovely talents and skills there.
Yeah.
It's interesting because so the 14-5s I have worked with, I'll often say to them, have you realized, like, are you connected to your psychicness, to your intuition, right? Because you're also bringing in that 5. And most of the time they're like, people always tell me, or like, I always think about something. And then like days later or weeks later, like it'll just happen, or that person will call me. And I'm like, okay, you are so connected. You're not even aware.
Yeah.
So start building that and start trusting that, right? That discernment. And it's like, I love when they step into that, or even when they recognize that on their own, because how amazing is it to be able to know that your intuition is strong and you can trust it, and it can help be a beautiful guide for you. So that's such a beautiful talent gift that the 14-5 brings in. And it's like just a matter of tapping into that and then having that just lead you through life. It's my favorite part about that. I love it.
For me, I think my favorite part is this comes from, I would certainly say, the Scorpio energy, but then especially the 5 energy, where it's about truth, that they are human lie detectors. I have heard so many people say this. It's like, oh yeah, people, like, they can't lie to me. I just know when someone is telling me the truth, or I know when something is my truth. Both of those numbers, the 14, the 5, they are so connected in with truth. With 14, especially with it being the small intestine, like literally their gut, they are very connected to that and know what is true and what is not. So we do call them the human lie detector. And that might be my favorite aspect, talent of what you can tap into and grow into. But hey, that can also be intense, right? Within relationships, your spouse or someone is trying to tell you a lie and you know that they're lying. That could be intense too. What is the goal of the 14-5, ladies?
So they come to understand who they are,
Yeah.
so that they can work out through all that reflection of themselves and others, who are they, and what are they, literally spend their whole life finding out about themselves, which sounds very fun, but can be really intense as well. Because you kind of get to, I'm a little bit older than you guys, you get to a kind of certain age and you're like, really? I thought I worked out who I was now. Seriously, there's more to find out? Okay, here we go.
But it's also
Well,
part of that
yeah.
self-acceptance, right? It's like getting to a place, and I think a lot of people in general kind of experience this as they get older. They're like, this is who I am, take it or leave it. If you don't like it, I wish you the best, but I love who I am. And I may have some challenging aspects of me, and I may still be stubborn in some ways, but this is who I am. And it's about coming into or stepping into that self-acceptance for you is like so grounding. It's so rewarding. It's like you can then step into your power because that 14 is so intense and reflective. And they are always trying to figure out, who am I? Yeah, it's like once you're like, okay, this is who I am. Got it. Great. I can work with this. And building off of that is like amazing. And then when you tie in that 5 and it's that gift of speech, and it's like, I can speak to people, speak my truth, but I can also very nicely write about it, right? Because that 14-5, especially in spiritual goals and soul destiny, they're here to write about it. And they're not here just they're not here to just write some romantic novel. They're here to write about from all their experiences, what they learned, how to help you kind of overcome and view that same lesson, that same challenge in such a beautiful way where you can also step into that power of discovering, okay, I've experienced this. I now can handle it better. I know how it works for me, how it fits for me, and how to grow from that. That 5 wants to motivate you to come to that like other beautiful side and aspect of all the things and intense relationships and situations that you've experienced in your life.
Well, we talk about it with writing, and it's true, we have that association, but you have to kind of keep in mind when this work was channeled in the 1980s. That was really the way a story would be shared with a large audience, was through a book. Today, in today's modern audience, sure, you could write about it, but I actually feel like podcasting is a great option as well, because the 5 is also about speech. And again, through it, like they're the sort of person who would probably be really great with a solo podcast where they talk, they share experience, they allow the audience that time to reflect for themselves, and they communicate actually verbally, and it doesn't have to be written. So I think that's something that's important for all of us to sometimes remember. Sure, we have this association, but there are options that are available to us now that weren't available then. And if we were re-channeling this work today, there could be more things that were included, and not just, oh, you're here to write a book. It's like, yeah, you might be here to write a book. You could also be here to start a podcast or a YouTube channel, or to share in a more verbally expressive way. And of
And
course,
for
the 5 is teaching, right? So basically, that sense of really being here to teach what you have learned. You go through the journey of learning so you can teach that experience to others.
and also and that is so 14-5 because they're so adaptable. The 14-5 is just so adaptable that they can kind of go with it. They can do a little bit, and they don't kind of even realize that that is a gift. That's part of their talents, that communication, that intuition. And like I said earlier, Yiannah, that when you're talking to some 14-5s, they're like, oh, no, I'm not very spiritual, I'm not very intuitive. Oh yeah, maybe I am. They kind of just
Yeah.
it's just so natural and normal for them that they don't. But it's the adaptability, coming back to what you said there, Lon, that they can that communication, that channel, that intuition. And they love doing the speech, whether speech is written or verbal or whatever. They love the speech to share the truth that they have found out in their lives, that they think is their truth that they want to share.
And it's interesting for me, Heidi, like as you mentioned before, you were like, oh, I'm still learning new things. I kind of wonder for myself though, because I know you do also have 12-3 in your chart, and that 12-3 is always wanting to expand and learn and grow. So do you feel like in some ways, like, yes, it's almost like the societal expectation we should know ourselves, but don't you think the 12-3 actually loves that there's more to discover and more to grow?
Oh gosh, my 12-3s. So with my names, as I said, I've got my birth name, legal name, and then I've got the common version of my birth name, and then the same for my
Yes.
married names. So that's 4 soul destinies in theory. 2 are 12-3 and 2 are 14-5. So
Oh
the
yeah.
12-3, I've found the 12-3 in my life has really, I've just taken on too much, too many projects. Some of the
Yeah.
14-5, expansion. And now I've got to the stage in my life where I kind of want to just calm it down a little bit, rather than kind of doing everything and exploring. And I'm English. I now live in France, and I kind of like to travel and do lots of different bits and pieces. So I'm always expanding, physically expanding my world, as well
Yeah.
as I'm literally, my soul's destiny ultimately is to learn, to share. That is ultimately what I'm here to do. So I love the learning, and I'm always wanting to learn new things. So with the 12-3 and the 14-5, it's like, right, come on then, hurry up, let's get on with it. Lots of things to do.
Yes.
Well,
Well, go ahead.
and so both within the 14-5, the 5 and the 3 in the 12-3, they're both teacher energies. The 3 is that master teacher energy, but the 5s are teacher
Yeah,
of teachers. So you're not
yeah.
just reaching out or maybe teaching, quote unquote. And it doesn't mean that you're going to be sitting in front of a classroom with students there. You
But I
teach
used to
in,
do that.
okay, perfect. But like you can teach in your everyday life too, but it's like this teacher of teacher energy. You're here to teach the teachers who teach the students.
Yeah.
So it's on such a beautiful, like grander scale, if you will, but all that teacher energy, it's like you can't even help it. It's like anytime you're interacting with anybody, it's just this natural thing. It comes out. You have to use your voice. You have this innate desire to share and motivate and like, oh, I have this thing. I have this little tool or this little piece of knowledge. And if it could help you 1% of your life, I have succeeded. So I have to share it with you. And I have to share it in a way that makes sense to you so that hopefully it has this beautiful impact or it leaves a mark on you. And it's such a huge drive for that teacher energy. And I even find it within myself. While I don't have 14-5s, I have my soul destiny is 5-5. So,
Wow.
and I have both of my talent positions are 3-3s. So using my voice and sharing my truth and expressing myself is like, if I don't get to do that, it's like I call the 3s like the emotional volcano where I'm like, I have to get this out and I have to get it out now because it's so important. You have to know. So it always cracks me up when I am in those moments because then I immediately go to 3-3s and your 5s and I get all these energies and I will laugh inside my head because I'm like, okay, it's okay. Calm down. You're going to get it out. But I can't help it. It's this drive in me. So when you look at these frequencies, it's almost like this validation and this understanding like, okay, I don't just like to talk or I don't just like to share everything about me. It's this innate drive in me. I was built this way. And it's like this validation. And it's also funny because you're like, the way it plays out for you in your life and you just see these numbers, you just can't help but laugh of the validity of it.
Yeah.
It's just amazing.
And Yiannah, I mean, not to make this an astrology podcast, but it is interesting that you bring up the 3 here because what is 3 in the system? It's Mars.
Mars.
So there you go. That's our kind of tie-in, right? That is certainly the like volcano aspect of that. What you're feeling there is that Mars just like, oh my God, I will explode.
Oh,
Which
yeah.
is so interesting. It is again, just there's then kind of that link with the 3 to those others because of that astrology aspect, which is interesting to think about. And I just wanted to kind of expand a little bit on the teacher of teachers for anybody who's kind of like, I don't quite get it. If you're not talking about teachers specifically, like you could think about this as like the coach for the coaches or the therapist for the therapists, right? So if that helps at all to sort of expand someone's understanding that this is not necessarily literally being a teacher in a classroom, although it can be,
It can be.
Yeah.
And it's quite interesting you say that because when I interrupted you, sorry, Jan, when I interrupted you earlier and said I was, but it's only now looking back, part of what I did, part of my job is I taught postgraduate teachers. So I supported postgraduate teachers. So I was teaching teachers, but I never had thought of myself as a teacher of teacher. It's just a tiny little bit of something I did as part of a bigger role. And then but I always think of teaching teachers of, oh, what I want to do spiritually. I want to, support people on their spiritual path. And then I look back And my first jobs were as a training manager in a construction company. And when you say to people, oh, you know, the five teacher of teacher, and they go, oh, no. And I said, yeah, but you taught first aid. You taught all those people how to teach first aid to other people. Oh, no, that wasn't teaching. So it's a really good point you make there, Lauren, about our notion of what is a teacher or a teacher of teachers can be at a local community level as well as in a job or on a spiritual path or as a mentor. You know, it's those constructs we put on ourselves about what these words mean.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of hate to use this as an analogy, but you know, with like MLMs and they talk about their down funnel, like basically anytime that you're going to teach something to a group and they're going to go out and teach more people and they're going to maybe teach more people, sort of a thing, is basically what we're talking about with this energy.
You know, it's interesting too, because soul contracts is not about predicting your future and you're going to have 3 kids. It's not that. It's very much like the intricate, like every day, your behaviors and your challenges and things you've had to overcome and how you think. It gets down to like who you are as a person. And I think what happens is sometimes I'll tell people, okay, this energy represents X, Y, and Z personality, and this is a gift that you have. And they'll say, well, isn't everybody intuitive? It doesn't everybody just naturally do this thing? And it's like, no. And it takes one of those moments to go, huh, that's interesting. Because for me, for example, with my 3s, I'm very much like, well, doesn't everyone like to share about themselves? And doesn't everyone want to like share the new thing that, and it's like, no. And when I reflect, I'm like, oh yeah, it's true. I've come across many people where they with their 7s, they won't share a single thing about them. And I'm very much an open book. So that's just one example. But you do find in this work that people are like, well, that's just who I am. But it's like, no, it's so much deeper than that. It's the energies around you. It's what you embody. And not everybody embodies that.
Yeah, I think that's maybe the thing that I do as well, is sometimes you don't know what is just sort of naturally human to do, right? Like breathing. Someone's like, well, you breathe. It's like, well, don't we all? Right? Versus like, what really are the things that you do that are unique to you? And so like the whole point is like, well, that's who I am. I'm like, great. You're following the intention that your soul set to become this person. Awesome. You're right on track. You're aligned. Good job. And sometimes, right, I think it's sort of planting that seed that you have the potential to be this person, even if they don't relate to it in the instant.
Oh, yeah.
That's a
Okay.
big part of it.
So if we were to wrap up the 14-5 in a beautiful box with a red bow, what would be that beautiful, inspiring message of these 14-5s? Anyone?
Oh, goodness. It's hard to put them in a box, right? A little bit. I do think, again, the biggest thing is just embrace that discovering who you are will be a lifelong journey, to not set that as an expectation. Because I think society is telling us we should already know by now, but just know that your path is to spend your whole life discovering that and just to embrace what that can be as a journey.
I love
And
that.
for me, I think it's about learning things, practical things that you can do as a 14-5, so that life's journey is just a bit easier for you. It's more pleasurable. You kind of get to the beauty of the 14-5. So learning about being in nature and learning things that will help you to be grounded, so you can kind of really bring that strength and energy and the beauty of the 14-5, so you then can deliver on it. Yeah.
What about you, Yiannah?
Oh, man. You know, I think for me, that whole, like you mentioned, that whole reflective aspect of it is just the beauty in that is so amazing, because we very often want to avoid, or like we may be venting about somebody who's doing something, and almost very like in that moment, you're like, "Ugh, but I also do this thing." And now you're like, well, I can't really vent about this person doing that thing because I do that thing. And it brings you to this moment of like, okay, I really need to like get in touch with that. I really need to shift that, because knowing you're a mirror and knowing other people in your life are mirroring to you too, you're like, okay, I want to be the best version of myself that I can be. And you're not always going to be 100% on. You're not always going to get it right all the time. You're human. You're going to have these moments where you're like, you're going to let your frustration win. You're going to let that anger come out, and you're going to share and express things that on a normal basis you may not. Okay. But I think the beauty in that too is like, okay, reflecting on all these situations is this beautiful self-healing growth journey that you go through your whole life. And I think a lot of people avoid that about themselves. It's very easy to blame someone else for a behavior that you also do, but because they did it, you want to point it out on them and it's about them. But it's like, we are all a reflection of each other. We're all a reflection of ourselves. And it's almost like the ultimate healing journey, because you're constantly growing. When you reflect on who you are in that intensity, it's like you're feeling, because in order to heal something, you have to feel it, right? And you're constantly feeling that. And with your fives, it's like this like you're feeling the energy of it. Like you can physically feel it, which is like such a beautiful feeling when you can. I'm gonna stop saying the word feeling. Okay, I promise. But it is, I just love it because it is like this like ultimate healing journey. And I think for me, as I've gone through my own healing journeys and coming out of that and seeing how amazing that feels, it's like I feel it off of that 14-5, because as you embrace the challenges and as you embrace the intensity, there's such beauty that comes out of it on the other side. And it's like you get there and you're like, yes, this feels so good. This is where I want to be. So that is my favorite part about that 14-5. And while, yes, it's easy to shy away from that energy, that healing aspect and that growth aspect is amazing. So it's almost like, why would you want to avoid that? Take it in.
Yeah.
So there's my
Yeah.
box with the bow.
Okay. Well, Heidi, where can everybody find you?
Hi, so my website's best place to find me is pragmaticwisdom.co.uk. So Pragmatic wisdom, wisdom.co.uk. Or you can find me on LinkedIn. I'm quite prolific on LinkedIn as well, if you're on LinkedIn, and that's Heidi Azzetanee Hallam-Coombe. And as you can see, my name probably wasn't the one I was born with. I've optimized my name, so hence why I've got an interesting name. So thank you. And it's been lovely talking to you ladies.
Yes, thank
And who
you.
do you specialize working with?
So for me, it's about people who perhaps might be looking at coming out of their corporate life or staying in their corporate life, but they kind of come to a point whereby they want someone who can help them explore the spiritual side of things, but understands what it's like in the everyday, can use words they're familiar with. So very grounded, strategic alignment type energy to help them to kind of look at other aspects that they kind of want to explore in kind of a very safe way.
Yeah, I think that's going to be so big for this year because we keep hearing more and more people are going to wake up. And I think there are going to be a lot of people who, like you say, some of them maybe they already wanted to leave corporate and they're like really done now. Or those who, yeah, they're not quite ready to leave yet, but they're like, what is this new awakening that has happened? And really wanting to dive in and explore. And you can help them reflect
Yeah,
on everything they're going through.
thank you.
Beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you everybody for joining us for another episode, a great deep dive and conversation with Heidi. Be sure to go and find us on Instagram, Let's Talk Vibes Podcast, or our website, theltvpodcast.com.
Yes, and as always, everybody, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share our content. It is the best way to support us, and we are so grateful, and have a wonderful, blessed day. Bye.